Like Abraham, the Bible's story of creation was born in ancient Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was very fertile, bountiful even, but it also held random violence in it. For the Mesopotamians, life was precarious. Crops and cities were often parched or washed away by floods and violent storms. There was plague too, and tribesmen raiding down from the surrounding hills.
And Terah took Abraham his son, and Sarah his daughter-in-law, his son Abraham's wife. And they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran, and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran.
Abraham's travels are a key to understanding the beginnings of the Bible. Just as the book of Genesis takes you on a grand tour of the ancient East, from the Garden of Eden, past the Tower of Babel, down into Pharaoh's Egypt, so Abraham's wanderings follow exactly the same route, past all the wonder and wisdom of the ancient world. The book of Genesis is filled with clues to tell us where and when this all took place. Abraham, it tells us, lived at Haran before he started his long trek south. Today, Haran is a well-known archaeological site in southeast Turkey, with a village lived in by nomads who settled down. Families, in fact, a bit like Abraham's. The name Haran means crossroads. Haran stood, if you like, at the heart of the ancient world, at Piccadilly Circus. Look, 1,000 miles over there is the Persian Gulf. The two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates that drain into it, run up there somewhere and end up not too far away over there. Now, of course, all down the sides of those rivers are the greatest cities of the ancient world, the cities of Mesopotamia, the land of Sumer. The Bible calls it the land of Shinar. Over there is where Abraham's going to next. Canaan, Syria, and then down into Egypt. They're rough little places, though, Syria and Canaan at this time. Little sort of mountain towns, getting most of their culture from Mesopotamia. Egypt, of course, is a land on its own, doing its own thing quite happily. So you can see that when Abraham and his family and his herds were travelling, they weren't just wandering around aimlessly in the desert talking to God. He was going down the ancient M1. He was travelling the whole arc of the Fertile Crescent, and it was a great trading route. You see, you went in boats mostly, but sometimes with donkeys along the rivers, and then you came round here and you went down into Canaan with your donkeys. You didn't go through the middle because there was a desert, and you and your donkeys would have died of thirst. We know an incredible amount about Mesopotamian civilization, largely because we've been digging it up for 150 years. But you know, at the end of the day, when you found all the splendid palaces and the heaps of gold and the great statues and all the rest of it, the thing that really tells you is the writing. Especially with Mesopotamia, because they lived in mud houses and they've all gone. Their writing survives. They invented writing. They wrote on tablets of clay like this one, polished up the surface with a beautiful shine. They got little wedge-shaped stick, and with that, they impressed little patterns. Now, these patterns had started off as pictures, but they ended up as completely abstract signs called cuneiform. And they stamped out all their little words in rows in such a successful system that it went straight round the Fertile Crescent. It went from deep in Mesopotamia, right through here, through Haran, right down. You can find it in the state archives of Egypt. And of course, if you invent a system of writing, even though it's taken up by dozens of languages, the style of your writing stays with you. So the Mesopotamian legal system, the legal contracts, became the legal norm for the whole of the ancient world. So Mesopotamian science and dating and all that, Mesopotamian culture came out of Mesopotamia, just like Abraham, on tablets like this. This actually is quite an interesting one. It's actually a land grant. It's a business contract. It tells you that Joe now owns his plot of land and he's bought it from Fred for so much money. Well, that's rather interesting because there's a passage in the book of Genesis where Abraham is buying a plot of land. Now, archaeologists dig those land grant tablets up by the city gates usually because that's where the documents were made out and the announcements, the public announcements of the change of property took place. And that's exactly what you find in the book of Genesis. But how vivid it is in Genesis. It tells you about Abraham, the man, buying the land in which he's going to bury his wife. And it's a lovely little story. This, of course, the Mesopotamian version is a very dry legal document, but they amount to the same thing. And if you look in those tablets, you'll find dozens of biblical customs. That lovely custom that Abraham and his family had of swearing oaths by putting their hand under their thigh. That's on these tablets too. Just as Isaac's dying words are taken as a written will in the Bible, so a man's dying words are taken as a written will in these Mesopotamian tablets when you read about the law courts and things like that. You know, great numbers of those Mesopotamian tablets are actually dated. The scholars have spent many, many years trying to fix Abraham and all his family into our modern history. Well, at present, those tablets, those old Mesopotamian tablets that deal with Abraham and his sort of lifestyle, date between 2500 BC and 500 BC. You can't really get much tighter than that. Perhaps they're older, who knows? But why is there this terrific obsession to put people like Abraham into our history? Remember, biblical history isn't like that. That deals in generations. You go from Adam to Jesus, and it's to do with a family. But we want dates. Why do we want dates? I think some people think that if I could march up here and tell you Abraham lived in such and such a year, that would actually prove the existence of God. Think so? Or perhaps there are other people who actually think that it would be nice to believe that there was really a time on earth when there were people like Abraham, people that founded nations and talked to God when the world was a pure place. I'll tell you something else too. You try and fix Abraham down in history, and he and his family will pick up their tents and they'll steal away over horizons that go on for thousands and thousands of years. So this, in the Egyptian Delta, this strange little field, is one of the most important digs in the Middle East since the Second World War. Here look just like ordinary fields, right? But just down in front of me, that is real history. It's the sort of the thing that the ancient authors and the Bible itself was talking about. It doesn't look much, does it? These few walls are going to be filled in again next year, and there'll be growing onions on here, and the archaeologists will be moving into the next field. At the moment, you can see the remains of a grain bin there from 1500 BC. Down there, a bit further, is a wall from a house of 2000 BC. That's the same time as that wonderful painting from Egypt which shows a family of foreigners arriving from Syria, from Canaan, in their wonderful robes, so reminiscent of the patriarchs and the descriptions of them in the Bible. The reports of the Austrian archaeologists showed what modern science could make of what at first had seemed to be one of the most unpromising sites in Egypt. Under the little houses of ordinary people in small graves, they found family treasures and the very bones of the foreigners, people like Abraham and Joseph who had come down into Egypt. And at the dead men's feet, they even found the bones of the little horses that had carried them on their travels. What, then, did the ancient Egyptians think of all these foreigners that came down into Egypt? The same Egypt in which the Bible says Abraham and all his family should be included. The evidence is surprising.